and the Dominion succeeded in taking back its territory. It was here that Class Zero made its first mark in the pages of history.
Yeah, if you can get the game to boot. Here at Spence Session, we don't usually talk about the past of games unless it's particularly important. This is one of those cases. Final Fantasy Type 0 was originally released back in October of 2011. It got very good sales, but was a Japanese-only release. It was apparently so good there was a fan translation that was going to be made for Westerners, but a few days before it was released, Square announced that they were releasing the game to the West. And as such, in 2015, they released Final Fantasy Type 0 HD. In March, they released it on Xbox One and PlayStation 4. In August, they released it for the PC. The big thing that I left out of this was that the original Final Fantasy Type 0 was released on the PlayStation Portable, a system that isn't very powerful, especially not by today's standards. I do feel this information is very important to know going into this. That being said, I'm not giving this game a pass for some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about. So what is going on in Final Fantasy Type 0? Well, in this game world, there are 4 main countries, and each one is represented by a god. Your god happens to be of the Phoenix, and it's also the Kingdom of Magic. Your country is currently in war with the Kingdom of the White Tiger, and their thing is machines. So it's pretty much a lot of swords and sorcery versus guns and Gundams sometimes. The plot itself, well, it's a JRPG, so expect to start the game knowing absolutely nothing, and for nouns and adjectives to get dropped as if you do know what's going on. You will learn what things mean as time progresses, but it still is an annoyance. In addition to this, characters, well, they're pretty one-note. They're either particularly bland or have one particular thing about them, and that's honestly about it. It isn't helped that the voice acting can be a bit...
What the hell did you just say? You want a piece of me, punk? Hey, yo!
Yeah, there's no real lip sync, cutscenes involving newer character models sometimes run worse than the actual game, and the dialogue is Lastly, characters will be mid-conversation, it'll just fade to black to get a different camera view, as if it needs to load new assets, as if it's a PSP game or something. Strange, isn't it? Now with the plot out the way, I guess we gotta talk about the port, because I count that as a part of gameplay. So, let's make this quick. After I downloaded my 22 gigs and hit start game on the patcher, it crashed immediately. To fix this, I had to go into my control panel, go into the dates and times option, go into extra preferences or options depending on what version of Windows you have will determine what it says, and then change the decimal symbol to some other symbol that looks like a decimal symbol. And then I can start playing the game. Not using DxTory to record because that would be too convenient. That's not even talking about the fact there's only 2 resolution options, they're not talking about the fact that it's 30 frame lock, and that's not even talking about how some rigs can't run this thing very well. Rigs capable of playing The Witcher 3 apparently. As you can probably imagine, this is definitely something, because the game was actually like top 3 of Steam when it came out, and then before that it was always in the top 10 in the coming week of its release. As of this recording, the game's peak of players was at 2,673. We're talking about a game that was in the top 3 sellers on Steam at one point. Something is wrong.
This sucks.
Now that we are done talking about the port, what is the actual gameplay like? Well, it's very comparable to Persona if you played those games, except it's an action RPG. When you're not doing missions for your school/army, you're basically doing quests most of the time. You can, of course, participate in lectures in your lecture hall because it's school and it helps to level up your characters. But like actual lecture halls, it'll be the least interesting thing you'll be doing while at school. First thing we have to talk about is your free time, though. Sometimes you have a lot, sometimes you have a little, but there's a limited amount of things you can actually do in it. Scattered around the school, there are events that will play out if you happen to be the right character, or if you just talk to a particular character. Basically, doing these will basically elapse 2 hours. Meanwhile, there are other things you can do, like quests, that will sometimes take you off campus. When this happens, you'll elapse 6 hours when you leave campus to go do these things. Also, taking lectures also takes 2 hours, so most things you can do will involve you spending some form of time in one form or another. Now, outside of those activities, your main goal during this time is to actually make your character stronger. You see, when you run out of your free time, you'll have to go on a mission, and these are heavily combat focused, often having multiple different objectives for you to have to do, and also the scenarios you'll be put into will also be different. You'll be dealing with different enemies, the enemies in different places, such as at high up areas sniping down at you, so having a well-rounded party that is capable of dealing with most situations is ideal. You'll find yourself doing this by buying the latest and greatest weapons for them, though not for everyone because you have too many people to manage. Then you'll be upgrading their abilities and spells, and having them level up either through conventional combat or through the lecture hall. Speaking of combat, it's action combat, meaning you can dodge, you can attack, you can block, and do various things depending on the loadout that you gave for your given characters. Your characters have their basic attack strings, sometimes specific attack actions such as holding back an attack will allow them to shoot a special shot or something, and then they have 2 offensive abilities that you can choose that could be either abilities or spells, and a defensive ability that can be something such as Cure to heal themselves, the Wall spell to cast an ethereal wall that will block projectiles, and the Block ability to block things, the old-fashioned way. Also in combat, you can do special team attacks and summon the summons in the Final Fantasy series, such as Ifrit or Shiva or Odin, which is always fun, but to actually summon the summon, you have to sacrifice the person you're using at that time. Speaking of characters fainting in combat, when a character is down, basically you replace them with another character in reserve. The character isn't dead permanently. When you return to the academy, they'll be revived, but this will affect your grade if you're on a mission. The actual gameplay itself is pretty darn fun, though I do have some issues with it. The school bits can be very slow, and this is mainly due to the questing, because you can only take one quest at a time. The main reason they do this is so that you'll be running back and forth elapsing more time, as opposed to you collecting all of your quests and then leaving the one time and making you elapse significantly less time, as opposed to the former. This, unfortunately, makes the game feel a lot more grindy and pretty darn backtracky, though in the pause menu there is an option to just take you back to the school, so it's not all that bad. Admittedly, a game getting grindy when you're trying to make characters stronger kinda comes with the territory, and I can't think of a lot of ways around that. That being said, the actual loop of the game I feel is fine, for the most part. Then there's the AI. It's competent most of the time, though there was one time where basically I went into a room and it was full of dudes and got turned to Swiss cheese before I realized, oh, my buddies are still derping around the hallway. Then there's the camera, like the AI, works most of the time, but every now and again goes nuts. Usually there's a wall involved, but most of the time it's competent. Presentation-wise, well, it definitely looks like Final Fantasy and definitely sounds like Final Fantasy, but it's not up to the visual standards that Square usually holds themselves to nowadays. When it came to the HD pass, some characters, like the entirety of Class 0 or more important characters, got the HD pass and looked, well, reasonable by today's standards. Meanwhile, other characters... yeah, it's like that. Meanwhile, the sound effects themselves sound appropriate, and the actual soundtrack, it's orchestrated and sounds fine, but none of the tracks really stand out in the context of the game. Also, the landscape can be pretty darn flat at times. In short, the presentation is just strange. It might look like a beta because some things are up-res and some things aren't. In short, it's inconsistent. And that's Final Fantasy Type 0 HD. Would I recommend this game? Not on the PC, not in its current state. If you own an Xbox One or PlayStation 4, I'd recommend it there for the gameplay, as the plot itself is kinda and the actual presentation, well, don't expect a bleeding edge experience at all. Just expect good gameplay if you're into action RPGs. Now, if you own a PC, my condolences, I can't recommend this, only because I couldn't even get the thing to start when I first got it day one. I had to go and change something that was so esoterically random that makes me wonder what the heck is going on with the code. And that's not even mentioning how there's only two resolution options, the frame block, and the problem that other people are having with their PCs not being able to run it when they turn up the graphics. Because this game isn't bleeding edge new either, so it really makes you wonder what's going on. So in short, if you happen to own a console, yeah, it's worth a get. If you don't, you're stuck waiting for Square to properly patch the thing, which I hear they don't normally do, or waiting for a kind-hearted modder to release a fix. Either scenario, the PC version is a good game overshadowed by technical issues that shouldn't be there in the first place. That can, and for a lot of people, has made it just 22 gigs of unusable code. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you happen to like this sort of content, drop a like, comment, subscribe, and maybe tell a friend if they would also be interested in this sort of content. In the meantime, if you want a game with more action and less RPG that's on the PC, I'd recommend giving Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition a look. You can check out my video for my opinion on that. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if you want more time management and RPG going on in your game, then I'd recommend looking at Massive Chalice. I did a video on that as well, and you can hear about my opinions on that.